Professor Zixathera stood in front of her classroom on the space station called Harmony Prime. She was not like the humans in her class. Her body was made of clear crystal that changed colors when she moved. She came from a planet far away where all the people looked like living glass. The classroom had a big window that showed the planet below them. It was a gas giant planet called Kepler 442b. The planet was huge and covered in thick clouds that moved in circles. Different colors swirled through the clouds like paint mixing in water. Jake Morrison sat in the back row of the classroom. He was the only human student in this class. All the other students came from different alien worlds. Some looked like big birds with blue feathers. Others lived in water on their home planets and wore special suits to breathe air. Jake felt different from all of them, but he liked learning about new things. Professor Zixathera pointed at the window with one of her crystal arms. "Today we will learn about the skyfish that live in the clouds below us," she said. Her voice sounded like music when it came through the translation machine that helped everyone understand each other. Jake looked down at the planet. At first, he could not see anything special. Then he noticed small shapes moving through the clouds. They looked like they were dancing in the air. The shapes glowed with soft light and moved in ways that seemed impossible. "These creatures are called skyfish," the professor continued. "They have lived in those clouds for millions of years. They are very special because no one has ever caught one alive. Many different alien races have tried, but they all failed." A bird-like student raised one of her wings. "Why is it so hard to catch them, Professor?" The crystal teacher's body turned a bright blue color. This meant she was excited to explain something. "The skyfish can do something amazing. When they feel danger, they can make their bodies pass through solid things like ghosts. They can also sense any machine or tool from very far away. If they detect anything that was made by thinking beings, they disappear." Jake wrote notes in an old paper book. Most of the other students used floating computer screens, but Jake liked using pen and paper. His grandfather had taught him that sometimes old ways worked better than new ways. "The Hegemony Empire tried to catch them with energy nets," Professor Zixathera explained. "The nets went right through the skyfish like they were not there. The Crystarch people used gravity machines to try to pull them down. The skyfish sensed the machines and vanished before the gravity could affect them." She turned to look at all her students. "Even the synthetic race failed. They are the smartest builders of machines in our galaxy. They made the most advanced catching tools ever created. But the skyfish detected them and escaped every time." A water-breathing student in a breathing suit made gurgling sounds. The translator changed this into words. "What do the skyfish eat, Professor?" "They feed on the electricity in the air," she answered. "The planet below makes strong electrical storms. The skyfish swim through these storms and eat the lightning. They also use electricity to talk to each other and to make baby skyfish." Jake raised his hand. "Has anyone ever seen one up close?" "Only from far away," the professor replied. "They live very high in the atmosphere where the air is thin. Special research ships can fly near them, but the skyfish always detect the ships and move away. The closest any scientist has been to a skyfish is about 1,000 meters." The crystal teacher moved closer to the window. Her body began to glow brighter. "I have studied these creatures for over 100 years. In all that time, no one from any planet has been able to catch one. It is simply impossible. The skyfish are too smart and too sensitive to our technology." Jake stared out at the clouds below. He could see the skyfish moving in groups. They looked like they were playing games in the air. Some were big like cars. Others were small like dogs. They all glowed with different colors as they moved through the thick clouds. "The skyfish can live for thousands of years," Professor Zixathera continued. "They remember everything that happens to them. They have learned to fear anything that thinking beings make. This fear has kept them safe for so long that catching them has become impossible." The bird-like student asked another question. "Why do we want to catch them? Can we not just watch them from far away?" "Watching from far away only teaches us a little," the professor answered. "To really understand how they live, how they think, and how they use electricity, we need to study one up close." But that will never happen. The skyfish are uncatchable. Jake felt something strange when the professor said the word impossible. His grandfather had taught him that when someone says something cannot be done, they might just be thinking about it the wrong way. His grandfather was a farmer who grew food on Earth. He always found new ways to solve old problems. The class ended when the station's computer announced that learning time was over. All the students began to pack their things. Jake closed his paper notebook and walked slowly toward the door. He kept looking back at the window and the dancing skyfish in the clouds below. As he left the classroom, Jake heard Professor Zixathera talking to another teacher. "These humans are interesting," she said. "They ask different questions than other species. But even human technology cannot catch a skyfish. It truly is impossible." Jake stopped walking when he heard this. He thought about his grandfather's farm and all the simple tools they used there. Maybe the problem was not that the skyfish were too hard to catch. Maybe the problem was that everyone was trying to catch them the wrong way. That evening, Jake sat in the station's rest area with his study partner Amy Chen. Amy came from the Mars colonies where humans had built cities under big glass domes. She was very smart and loved studying alien animals. Right now, she was looking at moving pictures of skyfish on her computer screen. The rest area was a comfortable place where students from different planets could relax together. It had soft chairs, tables for eating, and big windows that showed the stars outside. Jake liked this place because it was quiet and he could think clearly here. Amy noticed that Jake had been very quiet since their class ended. "You have not said much since Professor Zixathera's lesson," she said, looking up from her computer. "Is something bothering you?" Jake was drawing something in his old paper notebook. He always carried this notebook with him because his grandfather had given it to him before he left Earth. The notebook had thick white pages and a brown leather cover that was soft from many years of use. "I keep thinking about what the professor said," Jake replied. "Every alien race tried to catch the skyfish using machines and technology. But what if that is exactly the problem?" Amy moved her chair closer to see what Jake was drawing. On the paper, she saw a simple picture of a diamond shape with cloth stretched across it. A long string was attached to the bottom of the diamond. Below the diamond was a drawing of a net with many small holes. "That looks like a kite," Amy said, sounding confused. "It is a kite," Jake confirmed. "My grandfather taught me how to make them when I was a little boy. We used to go to the fields near our farm and fly kites on windy days. Sometimes we would attach nets to the kites to catch insects and small birds for his research." Jake's eyes became bright with excitement as he explained his idea. What if the skyfish cannot detect things that are not made with technology? What if they have never seen something as simple as a kite that flies using only wind power? Amy stared at him for a long moment. "You want to catch an alien creature that no one has ever caught using a toy kite?" "Think about it," Jake said, putting down his pen. "The professor said the skyfish can pass through things when they feel threatened. But what if they do not recognize natural materials as a threat? Cotton cloth, bamboo wood, rope made from plants. These are all things that grow naturally. No machines needed to make them." Amy shook her head, but Jake could see that she was starting to think about his idea. "Jake, we are talking about creatures that live inside a gas giant planet. The air pressure down there, the winds, the storms. It would be incredibly dangerous." "I checked the computer files about Kepler 442b, Jake said, showing her some numbers he had written down. "The upper part of the atmosphere has the same air pressure as Earth. The winds are strong, but not too strong for a well-made kite. And if I am wrong, we would only lose some cloth and string." Amy was quiet for several minutes. She looked at Jake's drawings and then at her computer screen showing the skyfish. "Even if your idea could work in theory, how would you get down to the planet? The station does not let students take dangerous trips. The station has research pods for studying the atmosphere," Jake explained. "Dr. Webb is the head of the human department here. If I can convince him that this is a real scientific experiment, he might let me try it." "Dr. Webb is a careful man," Amy said. "He will not approve something that sounds crazy." "Then I need to show him that it is not crazy," Jake replied. I Need to prove that natural materials might work where technology has failed. Jake opened his notebook to a new page and began writing down everything he knew about skyfish behavior. He wrote about how they detected machines from far away. He wrote about how they could pass through solid objects when they felt danger. He also wrote about how they lived in the upper atmosphere where the air was thin and the electrical storms were strong. "Look at this," Jake said, showing Amy his notes. Every time someone tried to catch a skyfish, they used metal ships, energy, nets, gravity machines, or computer-controlled devices. The skyfish always detected these things and escaped. He turned to another page. But what if I used materials that existed before technology? Wood from trees, cloth from cotton plants, rope from plant fibers. Things that have been around for millions of years, long before any thinking species learned to make machines. Amy read through Jake's notes carefully. She was trained as a scientist, and she knew how to spot good ideas and bad ideas. "The concept is interesting," she admitted. "Natural materials would not give off electrical signals like machines do. They would not have the metal and plastic that the skyfish have learned to fear." "Exactly," Jake said with excitement. "A kite moves with the wind just like the skyfish move with the air currents. To them, it might look like another flying creature instead of a tool made by aliens." Amy was still worried about the dangers. The atmosphere of a gas giant is not like flying a kite in a field on Earth. There are strong winds, electrical storms, and clouds full of chemicals that might be dangerous. "The research pods are built to handle those conditions," Jake replied, "and I would only go to the safest part of the upper atmosphere. If the weather gets bad, I can return to the station quickly." Jake spent the next hour showing Amy all his calculations and plans. He had studied the wind patterns around Kepler 442b. He had learned about the materials needed to make a strong kite. He had even figured out how to make a net that would hold a skyfish gently without hurting it. "You have really thought about this carefully," Amy said with surprise. "But there is still one big problem. Even if Dr. Webb approves your experiment, and even if you can build a kite that works in the planet's atmosphere, and even if the skyfish do not detect it as technology, what makes you think you can actually catch one?" Jake smiled and pointed to his drawings. "My grandfather always said that the best way to catch something is to understand how it thinks and moves. The skyfish have never encountered anything like a kite before. They might be curious instead of afraid." He drew a few more lines on his paper. "If I can make the kite move like a skyfish moves, if I can make it look natural and harmless, then maybe one of them will come close enough to investigate. And when it does, the net will be ready." Amy looked at the young man sitting next to her. Jake was different from most of the other students on the station. While others used the most advanced technology available, Jake still wrote with pen and paper. While others looked for complex solutions, Jake thought about simple ones. "I think you might be crazy," Amy said finally. "But I also think you might be right. If you are serious about this, I want to help you." Jake's face lit up with joy. "Really? You will help me?" "Someone needs to make sure you do not get yourself killed," Amy replied with a small smile. "And besides, if this actually works, it will be the most amazing discovery in xenobiology history." Jake closed his notebook and stood up from his chair. "Then let us go talk to Dr. Webb. We have a skyfish to catch." 3 days later, Jake found himself sitting inside Atmospheric Research Pod Delta 7. The pod was a small round ship designed to fly through the dangerous atmosphere of gas giant planets. It had thick walls to protect against pressure changes and strong winds. Jake felt nervous and excited at the same time. Dr. Harrison Webb had been very surprised when Jake and Amy came to his office with their unusual request. Dr. Webb was an older man with gray hair who had spent many years studying alien life forms. At first he thought Jake's idea was too risky and too simple to work, but Jake had prepared well for their meeting. He showed Dr. Webb all his research about skyfish behavior. He explained how natural materials might be invisible to the creature's detection abilities. He demonstrated his calculations about wind patterns and atmospheric pressure. Most importantly, he convinced Dr. Webb that the experiment was worth trying, because no one else had ever thought of such a simple approach. "This is either brilliant or completely foolish," Dr. Webb had said after reading Jake's proposal. But since every advanced method has failed, perhaps it is time to try something different. I approve your experiment, but Amy will monitor you. From the station at all times. If anything goes wrong, you return immediately. Now Jake was actually descending through the clouds of Kepler 442b. The pod shook and vibrated as it passed through different layers of atmosphere. Through the clear windows, Jake could see the clouds changing from white to yellow to orange as he went deeper into the planet's sky. Amy's voice came through the communication system. Jake, how are you feeling? Your pod is performing normally, and the weather conditions look stable. I feel good, Jake replied, though his hands were shaking slightly from excitement. The view down here is incredible. The clouds are like nothing I have ever seen on Earth. Jake had spent the previous 3 days carefully building his kite and net. He used bamboo poles that he requested from the station's botanical garden. The cloth was made from cotton that grew on Earth and was stored in the station's supply areas. The rope was made from hemp plants, twisted together by hand using techniques his grandfather had taught him. Everything was completely natural. No metal, no plastic, no electronic parts. Even the net was woven from processed algae fibers that could be found growing in many star systems. Jake had tested every material to make sure it would not give off any electrical signals that the skyfish might detect. The pod's computer announced that they had reached the target altitude. Jake looked out the window and his breath caught in his throat. There they were, the skyfish. Dozens of them floated through the clouds like living jewels. They were even more beautiful up close than they had appeared from the space station. These creatures looked like a cross between jellyfish and manta rays. Their bodies were transparent with veins of light running through them like glowing rivers. Some were as small as dinner plates, while others were as large as automobiles. They moved through the air with graceful motions, riding the electrical currents that flowed through the planet's atmosphere. Amy, I can see them clearly now, Jake said into his headset. They are amazing. There must be at least 50 skyfish in this area. We can see them on our sensors too, Amy replied from orbit. Professor Zixathera is here in the observation room with me. She is very interested to see what happens next. Jake smiled when he heard this. He knew the crystal professor thought his mission would fail. She had been polite about his experiment, but he could tell she believed it was impossible to catch a skyfish with such simple tools. Jake opened the bottom hatch of his pod carefully. The atmosphere rushed around him, but the pressure was comfortable, just like breathing air on Earth. He pulled out his handmade kite and held it ready for launch. The kite was diamond-shaped and painted with natural dyes to look like the colors he had seen on skyfish. The bamboo frame was strong but flexible. The cotton cloth was stretched tight and would catch the wind well. The hemp rope was long enough to let the kite fly far from the pod while still allowing Jake to control it. Here we go, Jake whispered to himself as he released the kite into the planet's sky. The kite caught the wind immediately and soared upward. It moved naturally with the air currents, dancing and turning like a living creature. The net hung below the kite, made from algae, fibers that were almost invisible in the cloudy atmosphere. Jake watched carefully as his simple aircraft began to approach the skyfish. The creatures continued their graceful swimming motions through the air, completely unaware that anything artificial was approaching them. They showed no signs of detecting the kite at all. This is incredible, Amy's voice crackled through the communication system. The skyfish are not reacting to your kite in any way. Their behavior patterns show no stress or alarm signals. Jake maneuvered the kite closer to a group of smaller skyfish. These were probably young ones, about the size of large birds. They glowed with soft blue and green lights as they played together in the electrical currents. One young skyfish separated from the group and began to swim in the same direction as Jake's kite. The creature seemed curious about this new object that moved so naturally through its domain. It approached slowly, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to brighter colors. Amy, one of them is following the kite, Jake reported, his heart pounding with excitement. It does not seem afraid at all. I think it might be curious about what the kite is. The readings confirm it, Amy replied. The creature's stress levels are normal. It is showing signs of investigation behavior, not fear or flight responses. Jake carefully adjusted the kite's position, making it move in patterns similar to how he had observed skyfish swimming. The young creature followed along, sometimes coming very close to the kite and net. Professor Zixithera's crystalline voice came through the communication system. "Young Morrison, what you are achieving should be impossible. The creature shows no awareness that your device is artificial." "Maybe that is because it is not really artificial," Jake replied as he continued to guide his kite. "Every part of it comes from nature. To the skyfish, it might just look like another flying creature." The young skyfish swam closer and closer to the kite. It seemed fascinated by the way the cotton cloth moved in the wind and the way the bamboo frame flexed and bent. The creature's light patterns became more active, cycling through different colors rapidly. "I think it is trying to communicate with the kite," Jake observed. "Look at how its lights are changing." Amy confirmed this from her monitoring station. "The bioluminescent patterns match communication sequences we have recorded from skyfish groups. It thinks your kite is alive." Jake held his breath as the young skyfish swam directly toward the net hanging below his kite. The creature was so focused on investigating this strange new companion that it did not notice the algae fiber mesh until it was too late. In a moment that would change xenobiology forever, the skyfish gently swam into the net and became entangled in its soft strands. The young skyfish floated calmly in the algae fiber net, making no attempt to escape or phase through the material. Jake could hardly believe what he was seeing. The creature that Professor Zixithera had called impossible to catch was now gently held in his simple handmade trap. "Amy, I have got one." Jake's voice crackled with excitement over the communication system. "The skyfish is in the net and it is not trying to escape." From the space station high above, Amy watched her monitoring screens with amazement. "Jake, this is unbelievable. The creature's stress indicators are almost zero. It is not showing any fear response at all." On the observation deck of Harmony Prime, Professor Zixithera stood completely still. Her crystalline body had stopped, changing colors entirely, which was a sign of total shock in her species. She had studied these creatures for over a century and had never seen anything like this. Jake carefully began to reel in his kite, moving very slowly so he would not frighten the trapped skyfish. The creature continued to float peacefully in the net, occasionally pulsing with soft blue and green lights. Its transparent body was even more beautiful up close, with veins of electricity running through it like living lightning. "The behavioral readings are fascinating," Amy reported from orbit. "The skyfish is displaying curiosity patterns, not distress. It seems to think the net is just another part of whatever creature it believes the kite to be." Dr. Webb's voice joined the conversation. "Morrison, you have accomplished something that every major civilization in the galaxy has failed to do. How do you feel?" "Amazed," Jake replied honestly, "but also careful. I do not want to hurt this creature. It trusted my kite enough to come close, and now I have a responsibility to treat it with respect." Jake guided his kite and its precious cargo back toward the research pod. The young skyfish rode calmly in the net, sometimes reaching out with small tentacle-like appendages to touch the algae fibers. It seemed more curious than frightened. Other skyfish in the area had noticed that one of their group was missing, but they showed no signs of alarm. They continued their graceful swimming motions through the electrical currents, occasionally glancing in the direction of Jake's kite, but not approaching. "It is like they do not recognize the net as a threat either," Jake observed. "To them, it might just look like their friend has gotten tangled in some kind of natural debris." Amy was recording everything on her instruments. The way the trapped skyfish is behaving suggests that these creatures might not have a strong fear response to non-technological objects. They have evolved to detect and avoid artificial constructs, but natural materials do not trigger their escape mechanisms. Jake successfully guided the kite back to his research pod. He carefully brought the skyfish inside a special containment area he had prepared. This was not a cage or prison, but rather a protective space where the creature could float safely while Jake studied it. The containment area was made entirely from natural materials, just like the kite and net. The walls were woven bamboo screens that allowed air to flow freely. The floor was covered with soft cotton padding. Even the lighting came from bioluminescent algae that Jake had cultivated on the space station. "I am bringing it aboard now," Jake announced as he gently transferred the skyfish from the net to the containment area. It still seems calm and curious rather than afraid. The young skyfish explored its new surroundings with obvious interest. It floated from one side of the space to the other, examining the bamboo walls and cotton padding with its tentacle-like appendages. Its bioluminescent patterns had changed to soft rainbow colors that Amy's computers identified as signs of contentment. "This is remarkable," Professor Zixathera's voice came through the communication system. "The creature appears to be comfortable. In all my years of research, I have never seen a skyfish display such relaxed behavior in the presence of any artificial construct. Maybe that is because this is not really artificial," Jake replied, as he began his return journey to the space station. "Everything the skyfish can see and touch comes from nature. Even though I built the containment area, I used only materials that grow naturally in various star systems." During the flight back to Harmony Prime, Jake was able to observe the skyfish behavior up close for the first time in galactic history. The creature was incredibly graceful, moving through the air inside the containment area with fluid motions that seemed to defy physics. Amy provided running commentary as she monitored the creature's vital signs. "Its bioelectric field is operating normally. Heart rate equivalent is steady. All indicators suggest the skyfish is healthy and unstressed." Jake noticed that the creature's light patterns seemed to respond to his movements. When he moved his hand near the containment area, the skyfish would pulse with brighter colors. When he spoke, the patterns would change rhythm as if the creature was listening to his voice. "I think it is trying to communicate with me," Jake said with wonder. "Look how its lights change when I talk to it." Dr. Webb was fascinated by this observation. "We have theorized that skyfish use bioluminescent patterns for communication, but we have never been able to study this behavior directly. You may be witnessing the first recorded attempt at interspecies communication with these creatures." The young skyfish seemed particularly interested in Jake's notebook. When he held up the brown leather cover, the creature's patterns became very active, cycling through many different colors rapidly. It appeared to be excited by the natural material. "It recognizes organic materials as safe," Jake realized. "That is why it is not afraid of the bamboo walls or cotton padding. These materials do not trigger its technology detection systems." As they approached the space station, Jake felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. He had proven that the impossible could be achieved with simple tools and careful thinking. But more importantly, he had made contact with a species that had avoided all previous attempts at interaction. "Amy, what happens next?" Jake asked as the research pod prepared to dock with Harmony Prime. "The scientific community is going to want to study everything about this breakthrough," she replied. "But I think the most important thing is that we have learned these creatures can be approached safely if we use the right methods." Jake looked at the young skyfish floating peacefully in its natural material container. The creature pulsed with gentle light patterns that seemed almost like a smile. "The best part is that tomorrow we take it home," Jake said quietly. This was never about keeping it captive. It was about proving that understanding and respect can accomplish more than force and technology. The skyfish pulsed once with bright, beautiful light, as if it understood and agreed with Jake's words. In that moment, Jake knew that he had not just caught an impossible creature. He had opened a door to friendship between species. The next morning, the classroom on Harmony Prime was filled with excitement. Students from many different alien species had come to see the impossible sight, a living skyfish floating peacefully in Professor Zixathera's classroom. The creature rested in a biocompatible observation chamber made entirely from natural materials that Jake had designed. Professor Zixathera stood before her students, but she looked very different than she had just a few days before. Her crystalline body glowed with colors that showed deep respect and humility. For someone who had studied skyfish for over a century, seeing one alive and calm in her classroom was like witnessing a miracle. "In my 300 years of life and teaching," the professor began, "I have learned something very important about intelligence and problem solving. Sometimes the most advanced solutions are actually the most simple ones." The skyfish pulsed with gentle rainbow patterns as it floated in its chamber. It seemed content and curious about all the different alien students who had come to see it. The creature showed no signs of stress or fear, even though it was surrounded by beings from many different worlds. Jake stood next to Professor Zixathera, still feeling amazed by everything that had happened. Students and teachers from across the galaxy had sent messages asking about his success. News of the breakthrough had spread through the galactic communication networks faster than light speed. Human Morrison has shown us all that innovation often comes not from complexity, but from seeing old problems in new ways, the professor continued. While we used our most sophisticated technology, he succeeded with materials that have existed for millions of years. A Vularian bird student raised her wing to ask a question. How did you know that natural materials would work when advanced technology failed? Jake thought carefully before answering. I did not know for certain that it would work, but I noticed that every species tried to solve the problem using machines and artificial constructs. My grandfather always taught me that when everyone is trying to solve a problem the same way, maybe they need to think about it differently. Dr. Webb stepped forward to address the class. In just 3 days of observation, this young skyfish has taught us more about its species than we learned in 50 years of remote study. We have discovered that they use complex patterns of light to communicate across vast distances, Amy added her own observations from the monitoring station. We have also learned that skyfish are not just feeding on electrical currents like we thought. They are actually having conversations with each other using bioelectric fields. They coordinate their movements across entire planetary atmospheres. The skyfish seemed to understand that it was the center of attention. Its light patterns became more active, cycling through different colors and intensities. Amy's translation computer was beginning to recognize some basic patterns in the creature's communication attempts. It is trying to tell us something, Amy said, watching her screens with excitement. The computer has identified several repeated light sequences that might be words or concepts. Professor Zixathera's crystalline form shimmered with what her species expressed as profound amazement. Young Morrison, you have not only accomplished the impossible, you have opened a door to communication with a species we thought we could never understand. Jake looked at the gently glowing skyfish and felt a deep sense of responsibility. The most important thing I learned is that respect matters more than cleverness. The skyfish did not trust machines or artificial objects, because previous contact attempts probably frightened them. But when I approached with natural materials and gentle movements, it was curious instead of afraid. A water-breathing student gurgled a question that the translator converted to words. Will you keep the skyfish here for more study? Jake shook, his head firmly. No, today we take it home to its family. This experiment was about proving that contact was possible, not about capturing a creature for display. The skyfish trusted my kite enough to come close, and I will not betray that trust by keeping it prisoner. The crystalline professor's body pulsed with approval. This decision shows wisdom beyond your years, young human. True scientific discovery must be balanced with ethical responsibility. Dr. Webb nodded in agreement. We have learned enough to know that peaceful contact with skyfish is possible. Future expeditions can build on Morrison's techniques to establish proper communication protocols without causing distress to these remarkable creatures. Jake spent the next hour answering questions from students and faculty members. Everyone wanted to know about the materials he used, the construction of his kite, and his observations of skyfish behavior. But the question that interested Jake most came from a quiet Christarch student. What will you do next? The student asked through their translation device. Jake smiled and looked at his notebook, where he had been drawing new designs. I want to learn their language. If skyfish use light patterns to communicate, maybe I can build a device using bioluminescent algae to talk back to them, not with technology that frightens them, but with living light that they might recognize as safe. Amy's eyes lit up with excitement. Jake, that is brilliant. We could cultivate different types of algae that glow with various colors and patterns. It would be completely biological communication. Professor Zixathara approached Jake privately as the class began to end. You have taught an old teacher something valuable today, young human. Your species has a gift for questioning what others accept as unchangeable truth. Jake bowed respectfully to the ancient crystal being. My grandfather always said that the word impossible just means no one has found the right approach yet. Maybe that applies to a lot of problems in the galaxy. Later that day, Jake and Amy returned to Kepler 442b one final time. The research pod descended through the familiar swirling clouds to the atmospheric layer where the skyfish lived. Jake carried the biocompatible container with their temporary guest, who had remained calm and curious throughout its stay on the space station. When they reached the skyfish habitat, Jake carefully opened the container. The young creature floated, out slowly, its light patterns pulsing with what seemed like joy at being home. Other skyfish in the area immediately surrounded their returned family member, creating a spectacular display of synchronized bioluminescence. "They are celebrating," Amy observed, watching the light show through the pod's windows. "Look how all their patterns are matching up." Jake watched in wonder as dozens of skyfish danced through the electrical currents, their bodies glowing in harmony. The young skyfish he had caught and released swam among them, sharing its experiences through rapid patterns of light. "I think it is telling them about us," Jake said softly, "about the kite, the space station, and the strange aliens who treated it with kindness." As Jake and Amy prepared to return to orbit, something unexpected happened. The entire group of skyfish began to swim in formation toward their research pod. They arranged themselves in a complex pattern around a small ship, their bodies creating a living constellation of light. "Amy, are you recording this?" Jake asked in amazement. "Every second of it," she replied. "Jake, I think they are saying goodbye. And maybe, thank you." The skyfish held their formation for several minutes, pulsing with synchronized light patterns that seemed almost like music. Then, as gracefully as they had approached, they dispersed back into the clouds to continue their eternal dance through the atmosphere of Kepler 442b. As their pod climbed back toward Harmony Prime, Jake reflected on everything that had happened. He had set out to prove that the impossible was possible, but he had discovered something much more important. He had learned that the key to understanding alien species was not superior technology or advanced science, but simple respect and willingness to approach them on their own terms. The story of the human who caught a skyfish with a kite spread throughout the galactic educational exchange and beyond. It became a legend that reminded countless species that sometimes the most sophisticated problems required the most humble solutions. But for Jake, the greatest reward was not fame or recognition. It was the memory of light patterns that looked like joy when a young skyfish was reunited with its family among the stars.